Continue to take a look at the candidates running for various offices. Right now, we visit with Jodey Arrington, candidate for Congress, Texas 19. Welcome back to the show.
Chad, it's great to be back. Good morning to you and your listeners.
How's everything going on the campaign trail?
Boy, things are going really well. We just got the financial reports in recently, and I'm proud to announce, if folks haven't read it, that we raised more money from more people than all the candidates combined, which is humbling and also exciting because it shows strong grassroots support. These are individuals that live in the district, and I can't think of a higher endorsement than somebody investing their hard-earned money in you because they think you're the right guy to represent them and their families and their communities. So that was a big shot in the arm for us. And then this morning, met with Dan Smith and Eddie Griffiths and the folks at the Lubbock Farm Bureau to make it official that Farm Bureau has endorsed me. Again, agriculture is at the top of the list. We got a real crisis here regionally. We can talk about that, but terribly honored. I mean, this is the strongest grassroots political organizations in agriculture in the country, and for them to get behind me and stand with me is again exciting and humbling, and our team is fired up.
When you bring up crisis and ag crisis, what do you mean by that?
Well, I mean that our country and the leaders in Washington are not. They don't value agriculture, and how do I know that? Look at the budget and pulling out crop insurance. Look at the farm policy and the Farm Bill. They cut $20+ billion from the Farm Bill, took cotton out of it on account of the World Trade Organization, and have really put our cotton farmers at an uneven playing field with China. And so they're just getting squeezed. Production costs keep going up. The prices are low. They can't compete with people who manipulate the market like China. So they're just hanging out there. And if we have another season like we did this year with no support, with no risk management tools from our federal government, we're going to lose half of our cotton farmers. And I hear that from the bankers that finance them. I hear it from the cotton gins. And I think it's, as I asked this morning, I said, Dan, is this a crisis? He said, is there a stronger word for crisis? Because we're there.
Visiting with Jodey Arrington, candidate for Texas 19. Going back to the Faith and Family Forum that was earlier in this campaign, subsidies were brought up as far as ag subsidies go. And you had a pretty powerful statement, I think, on that stage, and I'm paraphrasing you a little bit here. You basically said, if you're not for subsidies, you shouldn't be on this stage.
Well, I said if you're not for supporting agriculture, I think you shouldn't be on the stage. And we use the word subsidies, but the federal government supports a lot of things that are good for our country, both economically and from national security perspective. In this case, it's in the form of a subsidy, but it's 0.1% of the budget. So, yeah, if you can't get behind agriculture and you don't grasp its importance, its impact, and the value it's provided to our country and to this region, especially coming out of the great cotton patch in District 19, you have no business running for this office.
Is there anyone? And I guess the way you put it, it was interesting to me because I don't know if it was targeted at anyone who was on that stage or what, but was there someone on that stage or on stage last night that you don't think is necessarily strong enough to stand behind the ag community?
I think that we have a lot of folks in this race that are passionate about West Texas. And when you're passionate about West Texas and you love it, it's your home, you can't help but love agriculture and appreciate all the benefits of agriculture to the economy and to our country. So the question, I think, has to be, as I said last night, who's going to be the best leader and most effective representative to put ag in a position of strength by advancing policies that support it. Not just are you passionate, but Are you capable? There was a question at the Faith and Family Forum. This is, was mentioned last night at our debate by Greg Garrett. He went. I think he hit a few of us in his closing comments, and one of the remarks was about the colonel, and when asked about, we were all asked, what if we had a scenario where you had a strong farm bill, but you had Planned Parenthood funding in that legislation as well? Would you vote for it? Mm-hmm. And everybody on the dais said no. There are some moral imperatives that you just don't compromise on. And I think it was Carl that rephrased the question back to the colonel and said, well, what about let's take Farm Bill and replace it with Dice Air Force Base. And he initially said I wouldn't vote against my faith, and he would vote against that legislation. But then when Dice was in there, he just said, I don't know. I'll have to think about it. So, we're looking for distinctions. That's a distinction. I mean, he's got a great career in the military. I respect him. He's a nice guy. But, again, the folks out there listening today have to decide who they're going to vote on and who reflects their values and who do they believe will fight for our region and be the most effective at getting our country back on some of these big national policies.
Let me ask you, in response to that, would it be fair to argue, and I think he has brought up this point, and supporters of his brought up this point of saying, well, if you close Dice Air Force Base, then you might be weakening the country by closing down a pretty important Air Force base out there. So do you buy that argument, or do you say, no, we can, we would be shifting resources elsewhere, and life means more than anything? And, when you look at the issue of what Planned Parenthood does, they're in the abortion business. That's something we absolutely have to have a draw a line in the sand on.
I think that's a fair argument. I mean, if you have military deployed in combat, that's kind of like the endangerment of the mother. It's life for life in that sense. But if it's just about economic development, if it's just about infrastructure for housing people on a base, or a farm bill, which is critically important to our economy. This is we're in dire straits here, but in a scenario like that, again, I think there's some moral imperatives, some swords to fall on or hills to die on, or however you want to phrase it, and that's going to be one of them. So, but that's a fair point.
Before we get into some other issues, and I did want to get into some other issues here, but you brought up Greg Garrett, and last night at the very end of that forum, after I think he was one of the last ones to speak, he took some shots at you and others on stage when he was on this show. Took a shot at you, said that you were thin-skinned, DC insider, thin-skinned. Last night he said, and I'm quoting from KCBD here, "We got this Arrington, who is a darling special interest group that worked for Bush," and we're like, how did that work? So I'll let you respond to his criticisms of you.
Okay. Here's how it worked. I went to Washington, and I actually reduced the federal government. We cut almost 25% of the workforce at a regulatory agency. That's how it worked. That's almost $80 million in reduction. We need a whole lot more of that. We need people who actually don't just talk about this in campaigns, but have actually done it. So in terms of how did that work, that's how it worked. We cut regulations. We passed legislation that supported our community banks. I was actually in the rebuilding aftermath of Katrina. There was legislation that was going to cost taxpayers $70 billion. But it didn't take into consideration, it was for housing, to replenish the housing along the Gulf. But it didn't consider the insurance, the private markets that were going to also come in and participate. And we blew that legislation up, and it ended up costing $17 billion. So how did it work? It worked by saving money for taxpayers. In terms of being a Bush guy, look, I spent 10 years with him, and I love him. I respect him. He's a friend. He's an honorable man. He is a man of prayer, a man of God. He's a strong leader. He was for strong national defense. He cut taxes. He was pro-life. I mean, there's a lot of things to respect about him and his conservative, strong leadership. Did I agree with everything that he did? No, I don't agree with everything anybody did, including Ronald Reagan. But so if I'm guilty by association with President Bush, then you know what? I'll call that a point of pride for me. Special interest. Look at my financial report. I mean, that is grassroots support. Those are individuals who live out here. I don't think there's any special interest. I don't think there's one special interest check in there. But look, these are campaigns. I've been in one where these things happen, and I don't know why Greg felt like he had to say all that. He's a nice guy. Greg is a very nice guy, and I like seeing him out on the campaign trail when we're at these forums. So. That's his decision. I mean, we got to be accountable for the things we say. We've got to be accountable for the things we do. What I'm trying to focus on and talk about is my record, because that is the only thing that is distinguishing us as candidates, really. At the end of the day, we're all conservative. We share pretty much the same conservative philosophy, but I believe no one has a track record of conservative leadership and has delivered on these conservative promises that we're making, except for me.
We'll talk about that and other issues when we come back. We're visiting with Jodey Arrington, candidate for Congress, Texas 19. Back on the Chad Hasty Show, News Talk 790 KFYO. Jodey Arrington, candidate for Texas 19, in studio. Wanted to talk about, you brought up that you've run 2 races now. This is your second race. Mm-hmm. In your first race for Texas Senate, and talking about conservative issues and what conservatives want to hear, because I think for a lot of folks out there, they're trying to find out who's the most conservative, who's the most consistent conservative, and who's going to be the best leader in mm-hmm. this field of candidates. With 9 people, that's what people are trying to find out.
Right.
In the race for Texas Senate, at that point, you supported the Emerging Technology Fund, mm-hmm. said that it had done a lot of good for Texas Tech. Mm-hmm. The governor, now Governor Abbott, mm-hmm. was against the Emerging Technology Fund. So was Dan Patrick, 2 people who I think a lot of voters out there would say pretty staunch conservatives. They've replaced it now with a different program here in the state. Was Abbott wrong when he said that he was against the Emerging Technology Fund?
No, I think he's right, actually, and let me tell you why. The Emerging Technology Fund had 2 programs, essentially. One was for support of universities that could attract great, world-class faculty and do joint partnerships with private sector for creating centers of excellence in research development and technology commercialization. That piece is worked tremendously well for Texas Tech. I can only speak for Tech, but I think it's worked well throughout the state. What didn't work is when the government tried to be a venture fund. The government shouldn't be an early stage technology venture fund. That just, they cannot calculate the risk, like they cannot do the due diligence, and they shouldn't. That there are other ways to incentivize venture funds to Texas to do that. But I'll tell you, one of the probably the second largest, but maybe the first in terms of hard research, not social science research, but physical science research, is one of the largest grants ever. Was one that I worked on with ETF and private sector, many private sector companies that matched. And we got a 10x return on that in terms of jobs and other economic impact indicators. So we were the poster child, and that's what created the National Institute for Renewable Energy and put Texas Tech on the map in terms of our leadership in wind energy research, development, education, and technology. We actually already had the education piece, but the R&D and technology commercialization was basically stood up as a national center because of that investment. And man, did we make good on that investment.
I think that looking at this race, there are different tiers of candidates. I would say you're in the top tier of candidates. There are probably 3 people in that tier just about everyone knows who we're talking about in that top tier.
Is that an endorsement from Chad Hasty?
It's you're in the top tier. I'll say that. How do you separate yourself? You've got Lubbock Mayor in that top tier who has been, those out here would say, pretty successful mayor. As far as campaignings go, he's had a council to deal with that's been a little to the left, I think. You look at a colonel, a lot of leadership in being a colonel. So how do you distinguish your leadership skills from them? Because that's what voters are looking for, right?
I agree. No, and I think that's a fair question, and we got to talk about it because they're hearing the same things with respect to policy, and we got to differentiate here. And I don't think this is, and it's not intended to be mean-spirited. Again, I'll say that I respect both guys. I mean, anybody that's willing to do this, and they have both of them have had successes in their own right, but I think you've got my understanding of this economy, okay? And my understanding of the political process, how it works, how you build coalitions, how you work to get things done through that almost ridiculous sausage-making process so that the outcome is one that's conservative, one that reduces government, one that empowers our businesses and our individuals, et cetera, and one that supports West Texas' interests and values. And so that there's not anybody that last night I mentioned that I helped pass deposit insurance reform. And we can talk about the details of that, but that was good for rural America. It was good for West Texas. I helped put language. I was the main interface, the leader from Texas Tech University system to Congress for R&D and for other congressional relations issues. And I worked with Chairman Mike Conaway to put language in legislation that allowed Texas Tech to compete with land-grant institutions for R&D. That's a big deal. And if that doesn't happen, we lose the opportunity to go after monies for food safety, for cotton genomics, and things that we're really good at, and allow us to become that national Tier 1 university that we aspire to be. So I could go on, but that understanding of that process, nobody's done it. Nobody's even been involved in it, let alone been successful at it. And then to understand the challenges that our industry faces, whether it's healthcare. I'm president of a healthcare company. We talked about we need more private sector market solutions to replace Obamacare. That's what I'm doing right now. We're using technology to bring healthcare to rural communities. So I'd say that it's that perspective on the economy, and it's the understanding and success in the legislative process.
Where can people find you online, real quick?
JodeyArrington.com.
All right. Jodey Arrington, as always, great to have you in studio.
Thank you, Chad.